あなたはそれで生まれ変わったつもり？
やり直したかったんだ。何もかも。
で、結婚詐欺師。
君が賞金稼ぎとは、これも縁かな。
みんなグルだったってわけ。
あの時は仕方なかったんだ。僕をかくまったばかりにドクターは捕まってよかったのかもしれないな。君の手で警察に渡されるんなら本望だ。
Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is the fourth part in a four-part series based on Cowboy Bebop episode 15. We're just going to jump right in like we always do.
あなたはそれで生まれ変わったつもり？
やり直したかったんだ。何もかも。
あなたはそれで生まれ変わったつもり？
やり直したかったんだ。何もかも。
The word tsumori is awkward in Japanese. It's one of these grammaticalized nouns that has lost or virtually lost its original meaning. Tsumori is basically used in two main ways. One of them you're probably already familiar with, the other you're probably not familiar with. We'll see. The first one is the one that means intention in some sense. Nani nani o suru tsumori desu. I am planning on doing something. Somebody is planning on doing something. This second usage is when the verb that precedes that tsumori is in the past. It's much less common, and because it's much less common, it is inevitably much less important. But you are going to hear it, and you are going to want to figure out what it means. It doesn't mean intention. It means something like conviction or belief, and it introduces an element of doubt. It throws a certain doubt on the idea being expressed. So Faye has obviously been wronged by this guy. He said a few things to her, and she's saying to him, oh, you think you're off the hook now? Literally, she says, oh, you think by virtue of that you've been reborn, do you? But she's casting doubt on this idea that he has now been reborn, that he is off the hook in a sense. So this is actually a scornful way of asking somebody if they think that something is true. Oh, you think that's true, do you? Now this is undoubtedly a perfectly normal expression from the perspective of any average Japanese person, and it doesn't create any problems of comprehension for me either. I will acknowledge that I don't use it very much when I speak Japanese. I don't feel completely comfortable with it. Maybe I use it occasionally. One of the reasons that I don't feel that strong a desire to use it more is that the basic idea can always be expressed some other way. So Faye could say, if she were a rude and aggressive man like me, それで生まれ変わったと思ってんのかてめえこの野郎 or something like that. She could just literally directly ask, do you think you've been reborn by virtue of that? You also get these idiomatic expressions like 何様のつもりだよお前 which means who do you think you are? You have the conviction that you are who? Something like that. So you hear it. It won't always be used with a verb. You hear it in other places as well.
で、結婚詐欺師。
君が賞金稼ぎとは、これも縁かな。
みんなグルだったってわけ。で、結婚詐欺師。
君が賞金稼ぎとは、これも縁かな。
みんなグルだったってわけ。
Now this とは is something that we've actually looked at before, I think. It's very flexible. It can come after a noun. It can come after a verb. It expresses a sense of surprise that something should be true or that something should turn out to be the case. There's a sort of fancy that, what a surprise type nuance to it that makes it quite useful often in Japanese. So the sentence is 君が賞金稼ぎとはこれも縁かな? So you being a bounty hunter, maybe this too is fate. I don't think you have to translate the mo as to there. I think you can just ignore it, but that's by the by. You being a bounty hunter, perhaps this is fate. You, a bounty hunter of all things, what a surprise, perhaps this is fate. Something like that.
あの時は仕方なかったんだ。僕をかくまったばかりにドクターは捕まってよかったのかもしれないな。あの時は仕方なかったんだ。僕をかくまったばかりにドクターは捕まってよかったのかもしれないな。
Now this structure is basically the te-i structure. これを使ってもいいですか? It's that sort of structure, right? Only the mo isn't in it. Now you probably know that これを使ってもいいですか? これを使っていいですか? Are very, very similar in Japanese. There is a difference in the nuance, but it's not that great. And this is one of the structures that people learn fairly early on in their studies of Japanese. So, for those of you who don't know, it's used to talk about permission. However, when the verb, when the e adjective, I should say, though that is a type of verb, when the verb e goes into the past tense, yokatta, there is a change in the meaning. It's still similar, but there's a little wrinkle here. What is being said, basically, is that it's good that something turned out to be the case. It's pretty similar to the original meaning, but I would argue that you have to understand this somewhat separately in comparison with the tei form. So, これを使っていい means that somebody can use the thing in question. これを使ってよかった means I'm glad I used this thing. It's a good thing, I'm happy, I'm glad that X turned out to be the case. So if you take something like 何もなくてよかったね, that's like saying it's a good thing that there was nothing or that there was nothing there. Or to take a longer sentence, いろんなものを試してみることができてよかったね. It's a good thing that we were able to try out so many different things. So when the guy says, 捕まってよかったのかもしれない, he's basically saying, hey, maybe it's a good thing that I've been caught. Maybe it's a good thing that you caught me. If you take out that not in there, does it make any difference? It doesn't make any difference to the basic meaning. There'll be some minor difference in the nuance that, to be honest, is not completely obvious to me. But you don't have to worry about that too much. This not is not always easy to explain or rationalize.
君の手で警察に渡されるんなら本望だ。君の手で警察に渡されるんなら本望だ。
Here in closing, I just thought I would mention a little something about my process when I'm making these videos. I promise you it will actually be relevant. Usually I can understand these dialogues without too much difficulty, especially given that I've watched all of this stuff a number of times. Sometimes things are hard to catch. Sometimes there are individual words that are just hard to catch. Here, the tricky word was honmo. When we hear a word that we don't know, then we have to look it up. At least we do when we're making the kinds of videos that I'm making here, right? What that means is that we have to figure it out phonetically. We have to figure out what sounds are being produced. We have to turn that into hiragana in our heads, maybe katakana, usually hiragana, and we have to type it into some sort of online dictionary. So what happened here? I heard this as being honbo. Now, I don't know any word that's pronounced honbo, but from the context and from my knowledge of Japanese, I assumed that this was honbo as in true hope. There's hon, you probably know. Bo would be yokubo as in desire, or shibo as in hope. So I typed that in on my MacBook, H-O-N-B-O-U in Romaji, and I didn't get what I was looking for. I didn't get it popping up in the conversion options, right? So I thought, that's weird. Okay, maybe I misheard the vowel. Maybe what I thought was a long vowel here, the bo of hombo, maybe that wasn't actually a long vowel. There's a certain amount of natural variation. That's true in any language. Things aren't always pronounced exactly the same way. I thought, well, maybe this was actually a short vowel. Maybe it was hombo. So I typed that in, that didn't come up either. So I listened a few more times and I thought maybe they were saying homo. Now that's not a word that I know, but it kind of makes sense because b and m are both bilabial, as you would say in phonetics, which means they sound quite a lot like each other. So mishearing a b as a m or a m as a b is something that is going to happen occasionally. So I typed in homo and I discovered that that word actually does exist. That is the correct reading of the two kanji that I initially thought of. So hombo in effect does exist, but it's actually pronounced homo. When you don't recognize a word, when you decide that you're going to have to look it up, like I said, your brain has to work phonetically. And this sort of experience makes it clear how badly your brain can deal with that kind of problem. Under normal circumstances, when we listen to a language, we're obviously listening phonetically, purely to the sounds, if you like, and semantically. We're matching what we hear against various things that we know can be said in the language in question. So when everything's going fine and you understand everything that's being said, that might create the impression that you're hearing everything cleanly and purely in a phonetic sense. It might create the impression that your phonetic grasp of what's being said is very clear. But when you hear a word that you don't know, and you have to hear it purely phonetically to try and type it into your dictionary, you suddenly realize figuring out exactly which sounds are being produced is a much more difficult problem than we tend to think it is. In our own languages, we don't notice this very often because we are so extremely good at them. But when it comes to a foreign language, we are often put into a situation in which, if we stop and think about it, we will be forced to realize that our phonetic listening is not nearly as good as we like to think it is. That is a complex subject, and we will have to talk about it, I suppose, some other time. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. That was the final video in this series of 4 based on this particular episode of Cowboy Bebop. There will be plenty more stuff in the future, so I will see you then. Thanks very much. Ciao, ciao, bye bye.